You're listening to Live Free, Think Free, your home for uncensored news and underground music since 2011. All right, welcome back to another episode of Live Free, Think Free. My name is Derrick Broze.
I'm Micah, glad to be here.
And we got a lot to cover today. As always, we're going to be bringing you uncensored news, underground music from a perspective beyond the mainstream. Sometimes we call it the dead stream because all it does is spew up dead ideas and fake news and all kinds of things.
Or lamestream.
Lamestream works as well. We're going to start with the Houston story, a couple of Houston stories. We'll branch out, as we always do, into the bigger picture. Just to let you know ahead of today's agenda, we're going to be talking about a court victory relating to Ivermectin and the FDA. That'll be interesting. Talking about some disinformation developments. Talking about the popularity or lack thereof of the probably Democratic presidential nominee, current president of the U.S., Joe Biden. And we'll be talking about transgender topics as well. So all that and more. We're going to start, though, with this Houston story. I just wanted to point this out, Micah. This just came out in the last day or so. It's an op-ed, an editorial piece by the Houston Chronicle editorial board titled Vote for Charter Amendment Giving Houston City Council Agenda Powers. And the reason this is cool is because we've been talking about this before my campaign for mayor. Those who've been following, a couple of weeks ago, I was rejected off the ballot, so I'm no longer in the race. But even before that race, over the years, Micah and I have mentioned this relating to Houston because Houston has a very strong mayoral position, making the mayor, he or she, whoever, essentially a dictator, and makes city council members really kind of just window dressing in a lot of cases.
So if you live in a city with what's called the strong mayor, setup, then you're suffering in the same situation. And it's hard to believe, right, that in a city, let's say you don't even live in Houston or one of these cities, that a city in the country you live in or could have total control, basically, to the city corporation by one person, the mayor.
Well, the one thing I want to add to that is Houston's strong, although strong mayor forms exist in other parts of the U.S., Houston actually has the strongest one in the United States because of the way it's set up. So the mayor here gets to set up the budget and decide, okay, this member of this council is going to get this amount of money, which obviously creates where if you upset the mayor, well, then maybe you're not going to get the money for the park you want. But he or she also gets to set the weekly city council agenda. And the thing,
so he gets to decide what they even talk about.
What they talk about, what they go into. I like the way the Chronicle put this piece together. I can share some of our personal experience as we have over the years of talking about the food ordinance, talking about fluoride, all kinds of topics. And we would get city council members saying, I'm with you, I stand with you. Yeah, I'd love to talk about this. I think you guys are onto something.
Well, at least the Chronicle does say that it's a power thing.
I can't do anything. Yeah, and so as they point out here, council members basically can't introduce anything. They can, very limited in what they can do. They can tell you, yeah, I support you, thanks for coming to see me at the office, but they weren't able to. And they talk about an example of dealing with tenants and council member Letitia Plummer, and in a situation where the current mayor Turner didn't want to go along with it. And as they say here, this is no way to run a representative democracy in the nation's fourth biggest city. Thankfully, Houstonians have an opportunity to change that in this year's local elections. Voters will decide whether to approve a charter amendment that would enable 3 or more council members to, by written request, have an item placed on the weekly city hall agenda for the full council to consider. So as they say here, if Plummer and 2 other members supported her ordinance to charge slumlords a fee for neglecting repairs, they could put it on the agenda and enforce the council to vote on it. The current charter allows for 3 council members, I didn't know this, to call a special meeting. So they already sort of have this power, but it's a special meeting. It's not just a power given to them, but it's seen as a rebuke of the mayor, and nobody wants to upset the mayor, so they don't really go with it. And so this would just entrench that power. And as it says here, the amendment to enhance the council's legislative power would not slide Houston towards a system of minority rule. And in fact, this was supported by a large coalition of groups. And they say here, we simply believe the amendment would empower the communities that elected Houston's 16 council members to represent the city.
I'm a little confused. Minority rule. Let's talk about that. So we're talking about a majority of 1 now having to share with a minority of 16 or whatever it is, right?
16 council members, yeah. And the reason I think they made
I don't understand this. I mean, I just don't, because how does it get it to be a minority? Let's say that a smaller group of city council, we don't know what city council thinks now most of the time, right? Because they have so little power. For all we know, 16 council members think one way and a mayor thinks entirely the opposite direction. We don't know because it's such a, I guess you could call kind of a charade. It does make you wonder about we know there's a lot of problems with representation, period, much less representative government. So if there's problems with representative government, it seems like at a certain point the problems would just be more pronounced. Ruling over 4 million plus people with one person. It might be better to have two.
I think we're going to see if giving more voices really does end up making a difference. I think there's a chance, the potential for it. I think the reason the council or the Chronicle also added that phrase there about it's not going to slide us into minority rule, because as they point out here, the opponents of this amendment, which I really haven't seen too many publicly speak out against it. I will say I've asked most of the current mayoral candidates so far. Former council member and mayoral candidate MJ Khan says he's against it. Mayoral candidate Lee Kaplan's against it, and council member mayoral candidate Robert Gallegos. And that's interesting to me that two former council members who've been limited by this power are against this, and in their own words, they said that it could lead to chaos. That it could.
Yeah, I was going to say that maybe they think it'll be less
being put in, and so but they address that here, and it says opponents of the amendment believe it would encroach on the mayor's ability to get things done and lead council members to bring pointless resolutions and politically unpopular ordinances to the floor that stand no chance of passage. Anyone who sat through Harris County Commissioner Court meeting knows all too well how madly inefficient it can be when stacked agendas turn into marathon sessions. And they
so
say,
having to consider other people's ideas kind of does get in the way of streamlining being a 5G champion.
I think that's the funny thing is they're like, we're told it's this democracy and this and that, but then when there's an opportunity to make it actually work in that way, or at least closer to it, it's like, but we don't want to get all this chaos in there.
Yeah.
And I'll just say this.
Any more minds than one.
I'll say
that's
this
chaos.
on our story because I consider it, our show here, because I consider it on the record. When I asked State Senator John Whitmire, who's also a mayoral candidate, about this, he said he supports it, but kind of has this like caveat of like, but if I was mayor, we wouldn't really need it. And it's like, okay, that's all well and good, but the point is to entrench this, because even if you're a good guy or a good girl or whatever, somebody coming along later might go back to the old way. But he said this also comment said, but those people out west, they're going to try to bring a lot of crazy resolutions. It's like this idea that by giving people the chance to actually put things on the agenda, only crazy people.
Well, that's where I was going to go, because I'm not trying to say that all those politicians up in city council are good or intelligent people. I don't know them, so I can't make that claim. I'm not saying they're not either. But my point here is, do we really think, look how corrupt these people are in different areas, so the Senate, all the way up to presidencies, all this stuff. Do we really think that the absolute crazies are going to be able to somehow take over the city council? They're going to have to get voted for. They're going to have to get into office, and then they're still going to have to present their argument to the other city council members.
Exactly, and that's the thing with this. Just in case I didn't make it clear, this charter amendment, it still requires 3 council members, right? So that means me, you, and whoever has a problem with whatever issues still need to go visit, call, or email 3 council members, convince them enough to introduce it, and know that 2 other council members are going to step up and say, hey, I'm with them, let's talk about this. And the Chronicle does point it out. They say, while this is a salient concern, the concern that this could lead to chaos and inefficiency, we believe it sells short the seriousness of the council as a deliberative body. Consider that right now, the only forum for a council member to enact priorities without the mayor's approval is during budget negotiation, when members can propose individual amendments for the council to consider. This change would allow a block of council members to bring up an item for consideration, whether the mayor likes it or not, but the item still could face significant hurdles to passage. It would still have to win the majority support from the full council. This doesn't strike us as an infringement on the mayor's power, just a check. So I think that's a reasonable
this chaos
position.
thing one last time. So whoever wrote this article, whoever thinks that way, must think that their position is the position of order. This is orderly. All this stuff we're enduring and living through here in Houston, it's all orderly. It's not chaos. And then secondly, they must have such a lockdown, such absolute control of the funnel of who gets to be in the mayoral position. Because if they didn't, chaos would be more risky with one. Because you could get the bad kid. Right? You could get one of these miscreants voted into office because anyone could be it, and then that one person has mayor power. You see what I mean? In a way, the argument can be made that it's more chaotic only having one. And I do think the argument can be made that this isn't orderly.
I agree. And the final point I'll make with this Chronicle op-ed piece, because I think they're coming from the perspective of what you're outlining. They're also clearly, I wouldn't agree with them on everything here. They say Houston's strong mayor form of government is one of the things that keeps the city moving, and they lay out the good points. And they say this is preferable, for example, to the council city management form that's in Dallas, where the mayor's legislative power is limited to one vote on council and residents grumble about a lack of accountability and bureaucracy gumming up the gears. That could be true. I don't want to know enough to compare and contrast, but I like that they end it this way. They said, but even in Houston, the mayor's power should not be absolute. The city council should be allowed to function more as an independent legislative branch of government with the ability to participate in governments meaningfully and even hold the mayor accountable when necessary. We urge the voters to approve this charter amendment this fall. And they don't say the name, I don't think here, but
So that
it's
sounds like
Proposition
they endorsed the...
They endorsed it, and they're telling people vote for it. And to me, this is cool. Where, again, I mean, this is my second time only really getting involved in local races, and I'm not going to be voting for a particular mayoral candidate or promoting any of that. But this is something, and we've talked about this before over the years. Like, you're not voting for a person, voting for, this case it's called Prop A, and for an idea and for an amendment that could ideally give people all around the city more of a voice. And if you make the effort, you could go to council and get your crazy topic on the agenda, and then maybe some change could happen for the things you care about.
Well, it decentralizes the power.
That's exactly the way I've tried to put it. It's like decentralizing the power, distributing it to council the way it should be, I think. And probably the way most
Honestly,
people
it's a lot easier to
runs.
approach your city council member than most people probably even think.
Oh, yeah.
And if this happens, more people would be aware of that.
Exactly.
And
I mean, because I'm going to all these...
This could be healthy because the conversations, the ability to have the dialogue, and I know not everybody's a politico, right? Not
But
everybody's going to
do it locally.
Yeah.
Because, like you're saying, they are accessible. I mean, I've been going to a lot of these mayoral forums and candidate forums. They're just regular people there, and they don't really make. They make $3,600 a year as a council member. So they've got day jobs and other things.
It doesn't even pay for the gas when you think about it.
They show up there and they're there, and so I feel definitely a council member is much more accessible than a mayor. And the position we've been in, the mayor, as you said, current mayor is on his way out, is the 5G wireless champion, in bed with big wireless and other, all kinds of problems with him. He's not going to listen. But if we had the ability to get 3 council members to listen and say, hey, look what we're finding about this thing and that thing, then perhaps it wouldn't matter if the mayor is corrupt, because you have council members.
Well, see, you're going to let in some of that chaos and some of that slowdown.
That's the chaos they're worried about, that actual change. All right, well, yeah, so check that out. Again, if you're in Houston, Proposition A, you can learn more about it at my campaign website, DerrickBroze.com.
When do people vote for that? In November?
November 7th, yeah. And so if anybody is local and wants to vote and isn't currently registered, I do know that there's a cutoff of October 10th to get registered. So, and then the early voting is in late October.
So you could go vote for this and then just write in Mickey Mouse or something.
Vote for mayor, council, anything if you don't want. But if anything, I would recommend voting for Proposition A. That's why you see we got these yard signs. We've switched my efforts of being a mayoral candidate to focusing on Proposition A. There you go. Vote yes on Prop A. We just got these signs. And we're going to start putting them all over the city and trying to get people to be aware of that. Because I do genuinely think...
It has a reason here. It says, because your voice matters.
Brought to you by the Movement to Empower Houstonians. And like you said, Mike, I think you really hit the nail on the head. It's decentralizing the power of the city. And in an ideal world, in a world where people are engaged, I'm definitely not trying to sell anybody any lies and say, just vote for this and the whole city's going to be better. It still involves, now it's time for you to get engaged. In fact, now there's even more of a reason if this passes, because you can
now there's more doors to get in and say
and
what you
actually
think.
Get down, instead of just going to council and just speaking because it felt good. You can actually be on the agenda and not wait 3 hours.
Man, think about that, going to city council. Man, you got to go up there 3 to 4 or 5 times to even get anyone to hear anything you have to say.
Oh, yeah.
I mean...
It's a trying effort, but if you got a couple of people and you can go sit down with
council members... It's a lot easier to meet one of these council members in their chambers.
Exactly.
And set up an appointment.
And if you can talk to 3 of them and get them at least curious enough to say, you know what, I'll support a further discussion on that, then you get your people together, show up at city council, bring your experts of whatever, and
then the ideas can be tested in reality, and people can have more of a hand in the city they live in. And we have lots of things that people need to be involved in, like the bios, the green spaces, the flooding. There's just so many things. Having one voice and one mind on it probably isn't prudent for 4
Exactly. So I'm excited to see if this can actually happen. Maybe something good will come out of it here in Houston. But let's go ahead and jump forward. I know you had another Harris County one.
Yeah, and it's not super important, but it is kind of surprising that last year a massive overhaul of the county's floodplain maps was spoken about, but the release still is uncertain, and it's over a year after it was projected to be released. It turns out that FEMA projected the release of the maps to the public in spring or summer of 2022. There's a little bit of time left in summer, but not really, right? It's just hot. But it turns out that FEMA offered a statement on the map's release similar to the one it gave last year, including the identical estimate. Quote, this process will take approximately 1 year to complete, but could take longer due to the complexities and size of the study for the county.
They literally just said, we're going to send back the same thing.
Yeah, pretty much.
See if they notice.
Pretty much. Turns out that the flood control district for the county and FEMA began working on the comprehensive update in 2017 after a flood, right? Where we got 47 inches of rain, and it altered our understanding of how much rainfall we could take. I mean, think about it recently. We have a drought, right? We're a foot behind on rain, and here in a little while, we're getting to the rainy season. What's going to happen? The other thing is people need this because it matters for like their insurance rates, planning, and all kinds of things. It's just another example of, how long it takes for things to happen. Another example of how long it takes for government to give you the solution.
Well, that's definitely a good point, because I guarantee you, I don't know how much money are they spending on this and how much taxpayers, but if you paid some company back in 2017 a good amount of money to figure out a flood map for you, I guarantee you're going to find a company that's willing to do it and do it well. But do you know any of the details? Maybe you don't, but I just like, how does that work between Harris County and FEMA? Like, why is FEMA involved in that? Is it just because they have more resources, money? Is it mainly
That's what I'm curious about, is why
they have better scientists or something to help with the flood maps?
Or it wouldn't be that. I hate to be such a naysayer, but they wouldn't do it just because they were better. I think there's something else, maybe these maps have to be approved by FEMA, maybe
the feds or something.
Yeah, maybe because of the insurance. I don't know, but that's a very interesting question. Why do they have to be interrelated? Does FEMA have to, who's funding the project? That could be one of the questions right there, is where the money's coming from. And of course, then think about it, FEMA would want to get up in that mix to influence it. And of course, the Harris County Flood Control District wouldn't want to lose any little bit of power they still had. Yeah. So, but it will say that Chronicle did say that both the FEMA and the Harris County Flood Control District declined interviews about this.
Interesting. All right, well, we'll stay on that because, as you said, we're going into rain/flood season here in the Houston area. Well, we're going to talk about one more Houston story as our springboard to an international and definitely a national topic, which is the topic of transgender, gender identity debates, discussions. And as I mentioned a moment ago, Mike, I've been attending these different forums and local debates and getting to meet all kinds of people in my travels. And we were at a forum the other day passing out information about Proposition A. And it was one of these forums where the candidates all are just seated down. They had city council, they had controller, and then they had mayoral candidates. And they didn't really get to, it was like the kind of thing where they controlled the time, so you didn't just get to yammer on for hours and hours. Instead, they would ask a question, and they ask you to hold a red card if it was no, and hold a green card if it was yes. So right here, this clip we're about to play for everybody is at this Sagemont Civic Club, and as you can see, there's some organizers in the front area, the three people asking the questions facing the crowd, and there's all the different candidates. And I'm catching the tail end of them asking the question about the Houston Equal Rights Ordinance, which was a big thing in 2015 under former Mayor Anise Parker, who was a lesbian woman, the first openly lesbian mayor of Houston and maybe in Texas. And it became an issue where the debate was focused. It went from focused on like, hey, this is going to protect LGBTQ community, equal rights, etc., to discussion about transgender people in the bathrooms. And then the big rallying cry was like, it's going to let men in women's bathrooms. And it failed, and it didn't go anywhere. The people voted it down, and there's been talk for years now. I remember there was talk in 2019, would you bring Hero back? And this one is like, would you bring Hero back? The way they framed the question, though, which I can understand it being sensitive to or offensive to maybe somebody, but I'm going to have a discussion about this. They said something to the effect of, would you support bringing back the Hero ordinance, which would allow men in women's bathrooms? And what we're going to show you here is, as soon as they ask this question, you have one of the candidates for city council, who is Ethan Michelle Gans, who I know and consider a colleague and ally. And they stood up and were upset by this question, and we'll share it, and then we'll talk about it afterwards.
Sit down. Sit down. Sit down. Sit down, or you will be asked to leave. It's not hate speech.
It's hate speech to call trans women men, and it's hate speech.
Please leave.
are women.
Okay, the door's open.
Trans women are women.
Escort him out of the room.
Trans women are women. Trans women are women. I'm sorry, fucking trans women are women. And
Okay, the question is, the hero or
that was hate speech.
even though the city is
I'm leaving because they're not going to escort me out. I'm leaving, but I'm going to let them know.
So it kind of wraps up there, and you can see that a cop comes up at the end, and basically they walk outside, and that's kind of the end of it. There's no other further interruption. But just, and again, I say this respectfully because I'll mention that I just recently released my own report on this topic. I've been studying it the whole summer. It's a 4-part report that I take very seriously and compassionately. It's called Identity Crisis. People can find it at thelastAmericanVagabond.com. You can also go to theconsciousresistance.com, and I have an hour-long video also called Identity Crisis, where I sit down and talk with a trans person who is a friend, a family friend, and tried to really look at this honestly, And so again, I say that respectfully. I know Ethan, Michelle Gans here in the community, but I personally don't agree with the idea that asking the question, whether you think it was rude or just whatever, or maybe not phrased in the correct way, and I know we've had this discussion since the very beginning of our show, I just don't really like that qualifier of hate speech. I never have.
The phrasing of the question's everything in this issue, though. That's the thing, right? Because everybody that's interested in this issue is stuck on arguing, and it's not fair. That I shouldn't have just said that, not everyone, because some people will want to argue that trans women are women, okay? Other people would want to argue that people presenting as female may not be, or not even may, are not women, yet they don't want the right of that person to present in that way to be infringed.
Sure.
Then there's another group of people that don't believe that men that present as female even have the right to present as female, and want to do everything in the society to remove that. And it cuts either way.
Yeah.
So that's why this whole, and the little group in the middle there, they might, I don't know, they might have something closest to what I think might be a real view. You're born one way. You may present anyway, but you're born.
But you can't change biology.
Right.
And that has become, and this is why I think it's important. And again, this is not hate speech. I don't think it's coming from a hateful.
Well, if we already are set in our anchor that a trans man is, a trans woman or man is that, or then, set in the anchor that they can't be, we can't have a discussion about what's real here.
Dishonest framing of the argument from the beginning, right? And again, like that's my problem with what Ethan was saying there. And again, with respect, that if somebody asking a question is automatically seen as hate speech, because we all know, in this case, trans women are real women. So anybody who says otherwise is a bigot, is a transphobe.
Yeah, it's got their presupposition right there.
And I've come across this at some of the forums, and specifically, I will say, at the LGBTQ forum, another one, where somebody told me that, like, oh, so you think free speech does anything? And I think they were referring to, they want laws in place to stop hate speech when it comes to what they see as, like, for example, somebody might want somebody to be fined for saying,
yeah, how else are you going to control ideology?
And that's my bigger problem. And so, again, the topic, the series I did is called Identity Crisis. I did sit and try to sift through.
I mean, there's no other purpose in having a phrase hate speech except to control ideology.
Well, and this is the point I wanted to make, is what I'm looking at when I looked into the data. There's a bunch of angles of this. You got hormones, you got puberty blockers, you got surgery. So that's medical things, right? Lots of discussion around there. Data going all kinds of ways. It's in there. Look at that. But then there's also this other thing that I found, at least. There are those who are profiting off of this. You got everything from endocrinologists, you got colleges, you got people like the Pritzker family who are kind of promoting and funding through different ways. But then you've also got, of course, pharmaceutical companies tied into there. But you've also got people who have an ideological bent and who their real thing is gender identity. And you can trace this back to this guy, John Money, who was one of the first, I guess, hailed sex psychologists in the US and the UK, although also accused of abusing his patients and stuff. Very controversial guy. But it was his work, and some before him, that was promoting the idea that gender needed to be expanded or destroyed or just changed or just made irrelevant. And now we hear this term of gender expansive. So it's like they want it to be in anything. You can include anything in that box, LGBTQIA plus anything. So I think that's where we have, for me at least, it's an important distinguisher, because I think, like you said, there's some people in the middle who probably are more generally like, they'll wave the rainbow flag because they believe in equality, inclusion. They don't want to be assholes. They think you should,
This is what I hear about people, some people saying with the change in pride is like it changing from that
To being,
into like having to back all the political agenda of
the trans community.
progressive LGBTQ
Yeah.
ideology.
Well, and I've seen that as well. There's one example, and again, like I'm not speaking from this community, so I'm not claiming to, but there's a website, pages, internet, social media called Gays Against Groomers, and whatever you think about that title, they focus on just finding examples of people, particularly within the trans community, and show like examples of it being predatory or just giving people false information and different things, and even individuals who are saying like, hey, on Pride, I don't approve of this guy dancing half naked in front of the babies that are there present. Like, yeah, there's a difference between, like you said,
being vulgar,
family kind of thing, and then there's other people twerking naked. Like, so even within that community themselves, it's not, I think that's the other
where no
assumption.
matter what it was, a man, a woman, trans, nobody would want that probably happening from a stranger in front of
But
their
there
child.
are some people who appear to want to normalize that. But so even within the LGBTQ plus whatever rainbow community, that's the other assumption I've seen too, and I've got to see this through the campaign. Like, we went to go hang out with the Log Cabin Republicans. Maybe you never heard of them. They're conservative Republicans. And some people even are like, why do you guys exist? The Republicans don't want you or whatever. But the point is, not every gay person is a
Wants
liberal,
to back this ideology.
balls out, backing.
We need laws
There
to
are
change everything.
people who have different views within that community, and some are conservative, some
You see,
are
that's
whatever.
part of the problem, right? Is that they're telling people, and people are hearing, whether it's the culture, the media, or what it is, they're hearing, oh, if I'm this, then I have to identify with this politic, rather than I identify with this politic and I'm this, and I'm this. But they're hearing, I am this, therefore I have to, I am, what was it that Biden said? If you don't vote for me, you're not black or something?
Yeah.
It's like that, If I'm black, then I have to vote this way. If I'm
If you don't
green,
support
I have to
all
vote
of
this
our
way.
laundry list of issues,
Yeah.
you're not a
If
progressive.
I'm a
You're a
DCMLQ,
right-winger.
then...
And that's where it's gotten. I mean,
And
so,
that's not thinking. That's not thinking at all. That's just accepting a script.
Yeah, and I think that this is why I wanted to do this report and why I have started to bring up this topic, because I don't think it's the only topic that matters. I do think it does. I see why parents are concerned because of the push.
Well, that's the other thing about it, right? We talked about those three groups of people, right? I bet they all are the minority, right? And then there's all these people that get sucked up in their gravitas, right? Maybe some kid that doesn't really know what all they think. And now one parent's all freaked out because they've been told,
Well,
that these
also,
people are coming for their
sometimes
kids.
The parents
and then
themselves have the ideology.
Yeah,
They're
and then on
ready
the
to push
other
it on their
side,
kids,
you've got the other parent or the other person that's influencing the kid that's like, I was deprived of my right to be like that back in the day.
Yeah.
You have all this capacity to be like that. And so what I'm getting to is that you have this entire group of people, some people hanging by this people, some people hanging by this people, some people hanging in the middle there. You have all these people whose lives are affected for hours and days and money and money and money. What are they doing to change the world in that time? Some would say, oh, I'm opening it up more for expression of gender, okay? Or, oh, I'm saving our children. But other than those two things, it seems to me that they're just spinning a lot of mental wheels, spending a lot of money and time to try to argue someone into accepting something, and that doesn't seem, and I think if they're doing that on all these little herrings down here, for lack of a word, the authoritarians will continue to control the money, to create war, to divide us and sell off our nations.
I definitely think that this topic is a way to divide. I also do think, and I didn't get into this in my report, I'm going to save that for the future, but that there is definitely a transhumanist element at the core of it for some of these folks who ideologically are like the Pritzker family. Yeah, but what I was getting to is that I think that the extremes just seem to be amplified. And this is a point I keep making, and we all know it by this point on the internet, but I feel like it does need to be reemphasized over and over with different topics. In this case, it's the extreme of accept everybody and say my pronoun or call me what I want and accept me, or you're a hateful bigot, and even people who want to use the state and the government to try to fine and pass laws. And on the other side, you genuinely do have people who I would say are anti-LGBTQ, whatever you want to say, or who are like genuinely like, oh, not in my family, it's not going to happen here. and would rather act like those things don't exist and like people don't have freedom to love who they want, etc. And so those voices are getting amplified. You got the influencers on the left and the right, the mainstream, just making fun of each other. Right?
Yeah,
That's
getting
just
clicks on it.
Just getting clicks, exactly. And so that was the drive for me to look further into this topic and to do that report, to try to have some balance and nuance. I just want to mention one more story in relation to this because it's local and this is about the whole topic, is that here, Katy, which is west of Houston, this week the school board there, after protests and people speaking out, they passed this new school board policy, which to me I think makes sense, basically saying that teachers cannot be promoting gender ideology to the students, and if a student communicates that they want to change their pronouns or something, they need to let the parents know. And I
just saw in California they're suing a school district that decided that they are going to let the parents know in contradiction to the state law there that says they can't tell the parents.
That tries to and I get it in some cases because
but the state is coming down on that school district and suing them for letting parents know.
For violating the law that says they can't let them know, right?
And that just, I don't care what the issue is, drugs, sex, gender, writing, bombs, whatever it is, to not let the parents know. That right there says that that government thinks that they're more important than you.
I think that's common sense for most people, but yeah, we're in a place now where people are like, and again, you can argue the extreme where for some people, home life isn't the best, and so they might have a parent that's not going to be receptive, and it could be worse for them, but that's not always going to be the case.
But this totally undermines parents.
Exactly. I would say I think most parents across the board, and this is all this does, it doesn't say anything like ban trans kids, etc. It just says the teachers can't be promoting it, and if a child expresses it, they have to bring it to the parents, and it also says that students have to go to the bathroom of that they were assigned at birth. And but that became a very big kind of but just to show you, this is happening local. I'm sure it's happening in your area, and we will continue to follow that story. We're going to go to a quick music break. We'll be back to talk a little bit about 9/11, talk about how popular Biden is, talk about some disinformation, Ivermectin, and then we'll be done for the day. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Music.
Insert some song.
Insert some cool song.
Well, we're just a couple of days away from the 22nd anniversary of the 9/11 attacks, and I just wanted to take a moment to, commemorate that, because you're going to be hearing about it in the mainstream. I actually just today, I was in the car, listening to the radio, and there's some story that got me a little teary-eyed, honestly, listening to it. But it also teary-eyed, angry, because of just, in my view, the way 9/11 tragedies are used to exploit the whole, the war on terror mentality, right? I was just sitting there listening, and they're telling a sad story about a kid who was 5 years old when his dad died, his dad and uncle going into the pile trying to rescue people. His grandpa was also a retired firefighter, and he went to help. Well, he died of cancer, which they say was probably from the buildings and material he breathed in. And now this guy is a cop as an adult, and he's got his dad's badge number. And it was a nice story, right? Mm-hmm. But also just in my mind, I'm just damn, but all of this is just reinforcing that official story that Al-Qaeda came and attacked the United States because they hated our freedoms and blah, blah.
But that's where a lot of people are.
And that's where a lot of people, and so that feeling, I was wow, there's going to be people hearing this and feeling that damn terrorists, that strong. I mean, post 9/11 was a very, there was blood in people's minds across this country. There was people who just you were with America, you were just like the president at the time said, you're either with us or you're with the terrorists, right? So, and I was in high school. I was 17 watching the buildings fall down and just trying to take it all in. And so it became a very big part of my life. I was a couple years later, I remember watching them bombing Saddam, and for the first couple months before I really started on this path, I was we're getting the bad guys. I believed it. I didn't know what's what. And so I just remember that feeling of how they used things like 9/11 to really ramp up the fear porn, ramp up the war propaganda. And yes, it's sad the things that did happen, that people have died. But to me, the way I always see it is look, if you want to feel sad about 9/11, if you want to really bring truth or accountability, then investigate 9/11. There are still people to this day trying to call attention, including family members. And I'll just call attention. I'll probably play a brief clip here, but I just did an interview, released it yesterday, with Ted Walter, who is of the International Center for 9/11 Justice, and they've been around prior, named as the International Center for 9/11 Studies. They've done things had the 9/11 consensus talking points, which hundreds of different experts from electrical engineers, structural engineers, and philosophers, and a range of people involved in the movement have agreed are the strongest points in the 9/11 story that contradict the official story and show that something else happened, including explosions. And so I talked to Ted Walter of the International Center for 9/11 Justice, which he basically brought the International Center for 9/11 Studies back to life after being dormant, brought some new life into it. Now they're calling it the Center for 9/11 Justice. They are just about to release, I think it comes out on 9/11, a documentary called Peace, War, and 9/11 about philosopher and activist Graham McQueen, who recently died of cancer, and he was an anti-war activist and very much a 9/11 activist. His big claim to fame is in the post-9/11 years, he went and got all the original footage and listened to thousands of hours and watched thousands of hours of the footage being filmed after the first attacks, and collected all the different witness testimony of people saying, we heard explosions in the basement, we heard, just whatever, and collected all that data to show more than 200 different incidents of witness testimony immediately after, in the wake of it happening, not saying from above them, but things coming from below them, and video of lobbies being blown out, which seem to indicate explosives, and a number of different things. So that documentary is out, and this is just a conversation with Ted Walter about that. And I just want to encourage you, if that's new to you, or if you just want to take some time to remember that there's a lot about 9/11 we're still not being told 22 years later, watch that interview if you want to see it. It's at theconsciousresistance.com. And
the biggest thing I'd say about 9/11 at this point, looking back, is the Patriot Act. I mean, if you didn't want to look into it for any other reason, look at what the Patriot Act does. Think about the fact that it's never been appealed at the Supreme Court. Look at how it's used to manipulate and control, and what its agenda seems to be. I don't, the effects of 9/11. I don't know that we can ever, at this point, find out everything. Maybe we can. Maybe a real smoking gun can be found and it'll explain it all. But we know that almost anybody with sense, or anybody that's bothered to study it, including Congress, questions, says there's unanswered, questions. Yep. So if the Congress of the United States tells you there's unanswered questions, and the news and these people that are Center for 9/11 Justice and all these different places are saying this, why would anybody toe a dogmatic line that everything is in on 9/11? That's the one thing I'd like to leave on 9/11 right there.
Yep. And with that being said, we're going to go ahead and jump to our next main story here, which is just how popular Mr. Joe Biden is. And
It's Biden, not Biden.
to kind of tie it in together, you talk about the Patriot Act. Well, the current president here, he brags about being the architect of the original bill that led to the Patriot Act, the sort of framework for the Patriot Act. He brags that it was his baby, his toy, he brought to life.
He had a
so you have
baby.
that. He had a baby, and it's called the Patriot Act. So this is interesting because it came out from CNN and a company, I can't remember off the top of my head, a poll that he did. And there's two different implications. There's a lot to the poll, but the two main ones we're going to focus on. 61% of Americans think Biden was involved in Hunter's business activities as vice president. And we've been following this story for months now, and really since the beginning. Remember back in 2020, you were being censored right before the election if you said, hey, there's this report about Hunter Biden and a laptop and some business dealings involving Ukraine and China and Russia.
Crazy.
Don't talk about that. Well, here we are 2 years later, 3 years later, and the mainstream is admitting like he's on the verge of being charged with tax crimes, with gun crimes, not with the business stuff yet, but but there's still stuff going on. And this poll is showing that even among Democrats, people believe there's a large chunk of people. So it was a poll of 1,500 people over I think 2 weeks. 61% of those respondents believe Biden played a role in his son's business career between 2008 and 2016, while just 38% said they did not believe as much. And the House Republicans, of course, have been investigating this for the last year, trying to get into the details and trying to bring out the details. And we've covered them here. Unfortunately, it's one of those topics. Again, the left is like, oh, that's all lies. Don't pay attention to it. And the other side sometimes tries to amplify how important it is. Sometimes it's not as strong as they claim. But the point is, there are people speaking out like Hunter's business partner and friend, Devin Archer, who testified in front of Congress recently. We talked about that. And, on here, some more details of this, the poll here, they say nearly 2/3 of independents think Joe Biden was involved in these business dealings as vice president. 55% of the population believe that Joe Biden's posture towards the Hunter Biden investigation has been, quote, inappropriate. So that's interesting to see the tide shifting there after so long of being disinformation. Here's another one.
So doesn't it seem like both like the front runners on either group are like just constantly
Nobody
like,
wants them, dude. This is why I'm not looking forward to 2024. I think everybody should take a vacation around November 2024 and get out of the country for a week and just watch from a distance. But that's my personal belief. Here's another aspect of this poll. CNN poll pegs Biden approval at 39%, showing 67% of Democrats, not regular, not Republicans, independent, 67% of Democrats want a new candidate. And this is what people have been saying.
They probably
for
felt
a
that
while.
way back when he was vice president.
I mean, people have been
Nobody
saying
asked
this
him.
for a while, but they're just now. That's why I find it interesting that CNN's willing to put this on their front page of like new poll.
This is CNN.
The evidence is devastating. But people don't want Biden. Like now, it's like maybe we're witnessing a shift that's about to start happening where they're readily willing to admit he's not going to be the nominee. I mean, right now they're still claiming it, but we'll see. So again, his approval rating, according to this survey of 1,500 people, is at 39%. With just 74% of his own party indicating they think he's doing a good job. And what's worse, it says that 67% of Democrats would like to nominate someone other than him against Republicans, up from 54%. So that's the thing, too, is it's like on the way up. Support for him is trending down, but disdain for him and wanting a new candidate is on the way up. And there's also some interesting things that it says the only Republican candidate, because they did some of these polls of Biden versus this and that, the only Republican candidate who they say had a big lead over him was Vivek Ramaswamy, who's been like the young Republican who's a pro-Trump, real strong pro-Trump guy. And also it says Mike Pence, Tim Scott, and Chris Christie all bested Biden by 2 points. And that's the thing is,
But before you even get
most
there,
of those
you've
people
got
don't
the
even know who those people are.
Before you get there, you got the Democratic primary. And you got all the
Exactly.
other Democrats.
But we already know they're rigging the rules in favor.
Not here, RFK.
So RFK and Marianne Williamson and what's his name? I can't remember his name right now.
Freeman.
Cornel West, who's also running against him. They're changing the rules to make it where they're basically not going to be a threat. But think about that.
And you'll find out maybe in 6 to 10 years when some other radio show says, hey, remember 2024?
Mike Pence, people know him probably just because he's the vice president. For the people who hate Trump, they see him as the guy who saved the country. Tim Scott, I think he's a governor. You probably don't know him. Chris Christie, you kind of know him. Those three people who you sort of kind of know in this poll beat Biden. Wow. So, I mean, like, it's not even just that Trump can beat Biden. It's that other people can beat Biden. A young startup who's my age, who never ran before, is beating Biden in a poll. And then Nikki Haley commanded an impressive 6-point lead.
Like he wanted to be president. Now he's just the president everybody beat. Didn't we talk about beating Biden earlier? That's kind of sad, you know. Like you want to be president, you do all this selling yourself out. You just totally lose everything. Like, and you become a president.
Well, I think in this case, we're definitely dealing with some element of being propped up. I mean, because, and we talked about this before in recent weeks with
Career
Mitch
politician much?
Mitch McConnell freezing. He's freezed twice now since we had that conversation, just in the middle of talking. And I feel bad every time. It's not even the kind of thing, again, where I see the right, like, stupid progressive. It's like, dude.
It's bad. It's embarrassing.
You go out there. You just do the press conference. We just need you. Or for Biden, inject him with some amphetamines or Adderall or something, and then it wears off, and he starts looking confused and like. I mean, I really feel like that's what they're doing is just pushing him out there. We need you to finish. Like, we need you to get.
That's
to
what
the
they were
finish
doing
line.
with the Roman emperors towards the end. Meanwhile, the oligarchs run it all.
And it's kind of happening on the same local level. You got Sheila Jackson, who's been in the career for 30, going on 40 years. She's kind of nominating the next person to take her seat. It just follows down and passes down. But nonetheless, Biden's extremely popular, so look forward to that. Biden versus Trump 2.0 probably coming your way. Nobody wants it. Nobody's excited about it, but it's going to get good ratings.
But people are betting on it.
But it's going to get good ratings, and people will make money off it. All right, let's go ahead as we start to wrap up and wind down. Micah, you got this one about disinformation, election stuff. What's all this about? I know it's got Soros' name in it, so it's going to set some people off.
I know it was going to set some people off, and I almost deliberately avoided it because of that. And I really don't even want to say that name again. You've said it enough. But it turns out that there's this organization that's under a umbrella of an outspoken billionaire, and that they're basically they're trumpeting their success in nurturing a new potent alliance with big tech to quash election disinformation.
It's almost that time
again. So, these billionaires, they want to make sure that there's no disinformation. Because, billionaires know best, right? And expounding on its tactics in a recent press release, the Common Cause masterfully revealed its ironic contradiction. A group professing to be the champion of democracy while vigorously advocating for restrictions of speech.
Well, that's always good for democracy.
Yeah,
right?
that's great for democracy.
Just take away the freedom to say what you want, and that'll help.
Well, and I think by now we've all seen the effects of social media platforms and their relations to censorship and elections. Turning out, recounting its successful call for big tech to suppress political content it disagrees with, Common Cause outlined its anti-free speech strategy, stating that, quote, the continuing threat of election disinformation, quote, necessitated the silencing of certain voices via Twitter and Facebook. And we talked about that from the Twitter files about, how it wasn't just disinformation that was being quieted. Things were being said.
We were just mentioning Hunter Biden, right? And that was what was the election disinformation the last time.
Yeah.
And now it's the big story of the day.
Mm-hmm. So this group supposedly has a timeline. They want to moderate and downrank online discourse. They focus on the suppression of what they believe. You hear that? They believe to be, quote, false statements 2 months ahead of an election, and showed glaring biases by accusing some people of purveying election untruths. So, expect that to be a big battle.
Common Cause, huh?
Expect there to be new little misinformation flags on your social media when you comment about your real feelings or thoughts about one of these clowns.
This is not the first report I've seen like this. There's been other groups that are kind of prepping the public, I think, saying even Twitter under Elon Musk himself saying they're getting their election disinformation policies in place and stuff. So
they're talking about the future beyond that, because they remark that all of these platforms still need to increase their censorship efforts ahead of future elections, basically suggesting that the present censorship isn't enough. Well,
before we just jump to our last two stories here and wrap up, I just want to share this one. This was just because I mentioned Twitter. For those who are still trusting the Musk, this was just a couple days ago. Twitter can now harvest your biometric data, including fingerprint, facial recognition, and eye tracking data, if you're using the app, for those who download apps. as Musk's site quietly updates its terms and services for safety purposes. And so now this is because remember we talked about, he's calling it the Everything app. Now that it's called X, it's going to end up being Everything. And he wants it to be where you can either be verified by your voice, your fingerprint, or your retina to get on. And that there'll be, you'll be on all the time. It'll have your banking data, the health in the bigger picture. But that's what this new update says. It says that X has permission to use fingerprints, retinal scans, voice and facial recognition, and keystroke patterns. Anyone who uses fingerprint verification to log in. So that's the thing, is if you're opting into these things, you're participating.
Yeah, you think it's just your phone because your phone has this capacity.
But you're letting the app gain access to that now.
So if you do have that, one of the things to do is not to use your fingerprint or your biometric face. Or just use your own code.
Personally, I only use things like Twitter, X as it is called now, on the browser, on the desktop. I don't have the apps because the app is, because it's so convenient. That's when you're giving them access to all your stuff.
And that's why I'm saying, don't even use your fingerprint.
There's no reason to do that. It's just, you're just trying to be cool or convenient or whatever. But yeah,
because you might not read all the details on one of these apps.
Read them, let's be real.
And then you're going to give your fingerprint, your eyeballs, and your everything.
But what I will say too, and this is the benefit of having a privacy phone. Miriam and I have a Bub phone that she uses, and I use occasionally as well. And she's got one app on there that shows you, it's from the F-Droid store, which is basically like an open source Android store. And it'll show you, if you're like thinking of downloading an app, it says, here's all the trackers that are included in this. And it'll show you right away something you're downloading for, you want to look at the sunset and you need an app for whatever reason. And all of a sudden it's like, has access to pictures, recordings, everything. And you can really start to see like, why is this necessary? We did it recently when our gym, for example, they're trying to be all hip and cool and like just scan in, right? Well, we're not going to do that. So we check in with our phone number every time. They don't hassle us about it. We're the ones who do it. And when we did look at their app, because they're like, oh yeah, just download the app. It's easy. Then you just scan in. Well, this app gives them access to everything just to go to the gym. But most people aren't going to look at that. They're not seeing
It's like I go to a food place and they're like, are you going to use the app? And I don't know, maybe I'm just, out of step. I'm like, the what? And then ask me again, and you can tell the shift in their voice, like they're, I gotta ask this guy.
The application,
bro. And I'm like, no, man, that's too inconvenient. But my response to them, I've noticed more often than not, when I say that it's too inconvenient, they seem shocked. Like, that goes against the flow of what they're used to hearing back. But from my perspective, it is too inconvenient. I have to put another app on my phone. Have you read those use terms? No. So I'm not going to put another app.
And they definitely can't tell you if you ask them, like, because I've thought about that. We should tell the people at the gym, like, hey, do you know why we give you the phone number? Because look, this is
just
what
like the
that
TSA
app
at
is
the airport.
giving you
It's
access
the same
to.
thing. These people,
because I guarantee you, they're
are
not
the pushers.
thinking about it.
They're the pushers of it.
And most of those people, they're getting paid, like in this
minimum
case,
wage
minimum wage at a job, and they're just told, tell everybody to get the app. They don't think much deeper.
Yeah, then you don't have to check them in. Your job will be
exactly.
easier.
You have less to worry about if you just tell them about the app. All right, so let's go to, I got one, you got one, and we're done for the day. This is just real quick. It's actually a positive story. For once, we can end on a solution or a positive. A win for those who care about doctors having the ability to prescribe and recommend their own treatments. Fifth Circuit Court sides with Ivermectin prescribing doctors in their quarrel with the FDA. The Food and Drug Administration is not a physician, so it had no business cautioning people not to take Ivermectin to ward off COVID-19 infections, with social media posts stating, "You are not a horse," the Fifth Circuit said. And that's the funny thing about this. It literally brings into court all those stupid things the FDA was saying, like, you're a human, not a horse. Don't take horse paste, and like all the silly things they were doing. Now in court, it got brought to the case, and this Fifth Circuit Court says FDA has overstepped its authority with a campaign warning people not to take the drug, which now has reinstated the trio of doctors' lawsuit against the FDA. Dr. Robert Apter, Dr. Mary Talley Bowden, who I believe is based in the Houston area or has been, says between them they have treated or consulted more than 9,000 COVID patients, and they each have a patient survival rate of more than 99%, despite regularly prescribing ivermectin off-label to treat the respiratory illness. But the doctors say pharmacies stopped filling their prescriptions, which the FDA, by the way, approved in 1996, and ivermectin did win the Nobel Prize, the person who discovered it, for humans to use, and specifically to treat parasitic diseases, but it can be given off-label, like a lot of drugs. After the FDA launched a public relations campaign in spring 2021, sounding the alarm, saying that people were being hospitalized after taking high doses of the drug intended for deworming livestock. But again, that's the deceptive way they report it.
Yeah,
it's also for humans, but by the way, we're going to focus on the fact that it's given to horses and animals. And the FDA sent letters to the Federation of State Medical Boards and the National Association of Boards of Pharmacy warning against the use of ivermectin, with a link to an agency advisory saying that taking it in high dosage is dangerous.
Taking a lot of things in high dosages is dangerous.
Exactly. So then the two doctors, along with Dr. Paul Merrick, sued the FDA, the Department of Health and Human Services, and other leaders in a Galveston court in June 2022. They claimed the FDA exceeded its authority and violated the Administrative Procedure Act by interfering with their practice of medicine, regulation of which they contend falls with the states. And the FDA's campaign, which was coupled with their advocacy for ivermectin, caused them a problem. Again, major Houston hospital, this is what I was remembering, forced Dr. Tally Bowden to resign her privileges. So she was forced out of the Houston hospital for recommending ivermectin based on the FDA statement saying, see, the FDA says it's crazy. What's this doctor doing?
That's how it works with these big things when they broadcast out. Like you said, it sent a letter from the FDA.
They
and
start calling people and putting out statements.
The admin of these hospitals just takes what they hear off the wire.
And people, even they just trust the FDA, or they know who to listen to. So then the other doctor, he was referred to a physician regulatory board in Arizona and Washington for discipline. The other doctor was forced to resign from his post at East Virginia Medical School, where he was a professor in chief pulmonary and critical care. So they lose their jobs, they lose their board placements, and they've basically had been gone after. So after the U.S. District Judge dismissed the lawsuit, they appealed to the Fifth Circuit, and now this appeal has been heard, reinstated their lawsuit. Justice Department attorney said that the FDA has to be able to make these kinds of public safety statements about risky uses of drugs. But Judge Don Willett, writing unanimously for the panel, said that the FDA's social media post about ivermectin, in which the agency gave the impression that it was only meant for the horses and cows, he focused on that. And these posts stated, "You are not a horse, you are not a cow. Seriously, y'all, stop it. You are not a horse. Stop it with the ivermectin. It's not authorized for treating COVID. And hold your horses, y'all. Ivermectin may be
not
treating,
authorized by who? My doctor
but it
gave
still
it
isn't
to me.
authorized or approved to treat COVID." And so just doing that, and of course the media have picked up on it. And
So why
followed
did
it.
they have this agenda for a drug that had emergency use? The vaccine. Why did they to take this much energy for the FDA to go against an alternative treatment? We've seen them go against alternative treatments before, but they spent a lot of energy and a lot of time on it.
I think that, and I've heard people say this, and I believe it is accurate, that the reason being that they attacked ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, or any other thing is because in order for the emergency authorization to be approved, there need to be no other options for treatment. And if ivermectin or some over-the-counter thing is presented as an alternative, well, that doesn't justify the emergency authorization for the shots anymore. So I think it was a direct threat. The judge here, though, he pointed this, and I'm glad he noted what we're all seeing. The judge said, left unmentioned in most of the FDA messaging, ivermectin also comes in a human version. And while the human version of ivermectin is not FDA approved to treat coronaviruses, some people were using it off-label for the purpose, he wrote in the 24-page opinion. And he wrote again, the FDA is not a physician. It has authority to inform, announce, and apprise, but not to endorse, denounce, or advise. The doctors have plausibly alleged that the FDA's post fell on the wrong side of the line between telling about and telling to.
Yep.
Even tweet-sized doses of personal medical advice are beyond the FDA's statutory authority. So pretty good court decision in terms of freedom. And now
the case just goes
that
on.
That case just will continue. This is just one good ruling, though, saying
they won their appeal,
bringing the points that we're talking about. That like, hey, now it's in a court record that the FDA was BSing people about. Stop it, y'all. And meanwhile, there's accepted use of this. So anytime somebody tries to tell you anything about ivermectin, you can bring them this story. You can tell them in Mexico you can buy it at every pharmacy for $5 and take it whenever you want, and it's no big deal. There are human uses. But let's go to our last story.
I imagine that this sort of situation can happen with something besides medicine and some alphabet soup bureaucracy. But let's move on. That is a kind of, I think all these court cases are kind of interesting because people do bring exhibits to court. They bring information to court. You can't really just ignore all that. I mean, you can live out and just ignore it, but it's there to be seen. So they can't ignore it is what I should say.
Exactly.
But yeah, I don't know that this is that important of a bit of news to get into, but I do think that some of the reflections on it could be interesting. They're saying that, I don't know if you knew, I didn't, but the G20 is happening in New Delhi this weekend.
Starts, tomorrow or today.
Yeah. So meanwhile, I've been seeing also that China and India are having difficulties amongst each other and the relations. The rift between these two Asian giants is evident at the BRICS summit in Johannesburg, South Africa. Xi and the Prime Minister of India, Modi, did their best to project a unified front, but after Chinese and Indian diplomats held discussions about their disputed border region, there's actually been shooting, which saw an outbreak of conflict in 2020. Each country gave conflicting statements about who called for the meetings. That's not a big deal, but the thing the most important is that Russia will assume the chair of BRICS in the new year, and no country on earth is more motivated to accelerate the ongoing process of de-dollarization and to follow through on the creation of a new financial infrastructure for international trade and settlement, including a new commodity-backed currency to supplant the U.S. dollar. We've been talking about that for a while, for years. But a gold-backed BRICS currency will never take off without the full support of the world's second and fifth largest economies, while China's $18.3 billion economy trails only the United States and is double those of the other BRICS combined. India's $3.5 billion is still much larger than Russia's $2.1. And while Russia's economy is in decline after 18 months of sanctions and China's economy continues to slow, India's is projected to grow over the next year. So I guess the thing to get to with this is a lot of people were looking, and the article goes on with more of the details about the trouble between the countries and the effect this is going to have on a gold-backed BRIC nation currency.
I definitely think there's a lot of people watching. The BRICS meeting was just a couple of weeks ago. Now the G20 is this weekend, and there's a lot of these global. There's a UN SDG meeting in a couple weeks later this month. There's a lot of globalist meetings going on, and much of it is this sort of the struggle for the new, what they're calling the multipolar order, which is the China, Russia, BRICS, G20 sort of versus the Western NATO world order that we've all been used to. So it's going to be interesting times, and I do think we all know that currency is tied in deeply to this. If they continue to make deals outside the dollar, we should continue to expect U.S. inflation and the dollar's value to drop.
China and India right now account for 50% of the world's gold demand. That's expected to increase as well.
So maybe holding gold along with anything else, precious metals, anything else outside of state currency might be worth.
I think so too, and that's what I was going to kind of go to with this is, if you're sitting around waiting for the BRICS and these other powers and things to de-dollarize you, then you're just waiting for some other collective to be the answer. There's lots of answers to stores of value, and the dollar is but one. A lot of people say it's the cleanest dirty shirt, and maybe that's true for the interim, but there's lots of other options for interaction, financial interaction, trade, etc. And I think that's a positive thing. And we hope to hear more, but looking for China and India and Russia is just as bad as looking for the U.S. to save you.
Exactly. I mean, I think that point needs to be reiterated just one more time as we wrap up here, because there's so many people I see in the alternative community, truth community, whatever you want to say, online freedom community, who are falling into that trap. We're like, oh, China and Russia, like Putin's doing this thing or that thing. And it's like, hey, they have super restrictive laws in terms of freedom of speech, press, LGBTQ stuff, especially.
And just culturally even.
Culturally, also, I mean, China's the police state in a lot of ways. And so I don't think we should get caught in that dichotomy of which master are we going to worship more than the other. And
yeah, the enemy of your enemy isn't always your friend.
They're all not what I want to be about.
Most authoritarians probably just ain't a good fit for you.
So that's where we're going to end it for today, guys. Thank you for watching. We're going to play one more song. This will be from Total Chaos. I think we'll go ahead and play Welcome to the New World Order because it's pretty fitting. Good one. And that's it for
Welcome.
today.
And live free, think free until we see you again.
See you soon. Peace.
Then stop and just listen to us.
Welcome to the New World Order. What you find is just disorder.